These headphones cost less than $100. You know, I've been saying good audio is getting cheap and cheap audio is getting good, but not this time. Let's talk about it. This is the FiiO JT1, at the time of filming this video, $69 nice headphone that is a semi-open dynamic. We have dual entry 3.5mm on the bottom, a headband that adjusts with elastic up top. It's pretty light, pretty comfy, pads that are very, very shallow. Still have a decent amount of space though, 63mm tall, 47mm wide, and 21mm deep. The diameter of this pad ring is 101mm, so there is a lot of different pad options you could put on here if you wanted to swap the pads. These pads are secured via a lip, but you can also just twist off the pad ring that locks in right here. You'll notice that this baffle is pretty much completely sealed off. There's some small ventilation right here, and that's about it. This is more close to a closed back than it is to an open back headphone, but it's like a closed back baffle with an open back rear airspace, so to speak. And aside from that, the build, while it does have some metal components, it does feel pretty cheap. Pretty plasticky, gets the job done though just fine at $79. Comfort is better than I expected it to be. My only complaint about the comfort is actually how shallow the pads are, but it's still pretty dang decent at its price. Where this thing lets me down is on sound, but not all of the sound, just a specific area of it. Let's get into that. Oh, it says Born for Music right there on the side, look at that. The JT1 falls victim to a common problem. I would call it the Beats effect, where a headphone goes under the marketing strategy of more bass equals more sound quality. And there's a lot of people like this. There's a lot of people who think that more bass is going to make your headphones sound better. This isn't one of those times though. And you know, I understand this is a cheap headphone. There are some things about it that are completely redeemable. And there are ways to probably fix the way that these deliver bass, because it's not deep sub bass. It's more just like lots of mid bass. The best way I could put it is think about a large PVC pipe, like one that's about this big in diameter, maybe like a 6-inch PVC pipe or something like that. And give yourself about the length of my table in that PVC pipe. Play your music through that, and it's gonna sound like dun 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 dun. That's what these sound like. Everything is just that super tubby, tubular, like listening in a pipe kind of mid bass that I really can't get down with. It bleeds into vocals really bad. If there's anything with a kick drum, it bleeds into that really bad. It just engulfs the lower part of the mid range, and I can't get behind it. Above that, these definitely do get sibilant. They're not really peaky though, just a bit more erratic sounding. So there are some songs that sound dark, some songs that sound bright, but neither are too extreme in either direction, just a bit dark or a bit bright. So while it definitely isn't elegant in its tuning, it's also not horrible outside of that mid-bass bump. In fact, I would say the mid-range and the treble are tolerable. And I would probably feel much better about this headphone as a whole if the mid-bass wasn't so bloated. Now, at its price point, again, what can you expect? I mean, there have been other things in this price range that are acceptable. I think for this kind of money, you're still way better off getting something like an MDR 7506 and some Yaxi pads, or going slightly higher in price, getting an AKG K361, because this isn't a fully open back headphone, and a K361 sounds way better, but these are a little bit more comfortable. So it really comes down to what your priorities are. They are easy to drive, but let's talk about amplification during measurements. We'll get to that in just a second. Do these sound detailed? To me, not really. You know, about as much as any other sort of cheap Walmart level headphone, which is kind of where these lean towards. It's like if you took just your generic Walmart Skull Candy headphone and gave it slightly better treble. The staging is okay, but not excellent. Vocals are pretty narrow, but not intimate. The timbre's a little bit funky. So it's like vocals are thin because of the treble elevating a little bit, but they're also very tubby and bloomy and bloated because of that big mid-bass hump. So it ends up sounding more like just the mid-range of vocals is kind of scooped out, so things are bright and nasally. There are some things that sounded pretty decent with this. Certain types of electronic music sounded pretty good as long as they were not operating much in that mid-bass band. And if I broke the seal a little bit, that mid-bass started to go down some, which actually was a pleasant change. I mean, that means that these would be a good candidate for modding. That's worth considering. But we're not modding these today. Let's talk about frequency response and impedance curve. So I've got the graph pulled up here. You can see the sub bass is pretty decent, but it's not a super high level. The highest level of the entire frequency response is the mid bass. So the sub bass starts rolling up towards the mid bass where it gets to its highest point, then dips way back down under the window of average oscillator preference at its lowest point around 270, 280 hertz. Starts rising back up and hits its high point again around like 580, 590 hertz, dips right back down and then back up. And we kind of see more ups and downs throughout the treble. You can see where sometimes it sounds brighter and sometimes it sounds darker. It's just kinda all over the place. It's nowhere near as bad as like the TH616 from Fostex. In fact, I would say this is a way better headphone than anything Fostex has made in the last decade. Aside from their T50s, and the T50 series was like a modder's dream. But I have higher expectations for a headphone in 2024. The K361 exists. That set a new bar. We really should be paying attention to that. Make of this frequency response what you will. Again, it's not as bad as a lot of things out there, and it would be significantly better, especially in a budget range. I could ignore, it being a bit erratic throughout the mid-range and treble. If the bass was just a little bit more under control, EQing that bass hump down makes it sound way better, like a substantially better headphone, despite it still having times where it leans bright, despite it still having times where it leans dark. Fixing that bass makes this so much better, especially if you give it actual sub bass instead of just mid bass, then it really comes to life. And hey, at this price point, if you want to buy this headphone and use it with some EQ and bring that mid bass down, that sub bass up, that's pretty dang hard to beat because this thing is $69. Nice. And EQ is free. EQ APO, use that on Windows. There's some great videos about that here on the channel. Doing those two things, you end up with a headphone that is great. But if you're looking at it just for its stock sound, that mid-bass bump is just so massive and so aggressive that it is an absolute deal breaker for me. Now, here's the fun part. It gets bigger. I had several people tell me to try it on tubes because that would fix it. If you put this on tubes, you're going to get more bass. Here's the impedance curve of this headphone. If you put this on an amplifier with a high impedance output or an OTL tube amp, that area that you see bumped up here is going to rise up even more. Now that would give it a little bit more sub bass, but it's also going to give it more mid bass. It will reduce some parts of the treble at least a little bit by comparison, but I really would prefer this thing to have less mid bass and not more. And this might be your preferences. If you want like an absolute bass monster, you could do this. There are other closed or semi-open headphones out there that are better, though at this price point, it's, kind of a tough call either way. I would still just get the AKG K361 instead. But again, if you're going to use this thing with EQ, why not? So I hate to harp on a cheap headphone for being bad, but it's a cheap headphone that is kind of bad. I understand why some people like it because some people just want pounding bass and that's it. But if I want a bass headphone, I want it to be a headphone that produces sub bass, not lots of mid bass. I wouldn't fault anyone for purchasing this, just for having fun. And again, if you want to use this with EQ, I bet you could set up something pretty decent. Can I find where the holes on this baffle are? There we go. As a cheap headphone, I would take this and EQ it over like those super cheap, like $10 Sonys. And I mean, again, the comfort's decent, but this thing really is overhyped. But it's going to continue to be, and it's probably still gonna sell like crazy because a lot of people like bass. That is how I feel about the FiiO JT1, a budget headphone with ups and downs that I really wish was just a little bit better. If it didn't have that bump, again, this thing would really be dominating at its price point, but instead, I cannot recommend it without EQ. Or some sort of modification. Who knows, maybe I'll try modding this thing in the future, see if I can squeeze some performance out of it. But I think that one's gonna wrap this up. So guys, if you like this video, leave a like down below, a comment letting me know what you want to see in the future. If you wanna get active in the community, you can at the forum or Discord, both available at the link in the video description. As always, don't forget to stick around, subscribe for more videos like this in the future. Till next one, guys. Peace.